Okay, thanks everybody for coming. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. We know that this is pretty uncertain times and kind of crazy market conditions that we're facing, and we've been made pretty aware that a lot of people are really looking at ways to kind of right-size their environment or look for ways to save some money. So we thought this was a pretty good topic to hit, and my partner in crime here, Kevin, and I are very much looking forward to covering this material with you. Quick housekeeping item. If you do have any questions as we go through this, please feel free to post them in the chat, and we will get to those as we see them. First up, a little bit about myself. My name is Jason Carrier. I'm the product manager for Network Performance Monitor and User Device Tracker. I've been doing IT for right around 20 years or so. Most of my experience comes from engineering in the government sector. And then more recently, I've gotten into kind of the business aspect of things and went through the technology commercialization program at UT. I'm a big fan of IoT and technology in general, and consider myself a lifelong geek. Next up, we've got Kevin. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. So, hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Sparenberg. I am the Technical Content Manager for the SolarWinds community, THWAC. I have been in IT since high school, and I'm not going to tell you how many years that is because it makes me feel old. I've worked a number of jobs, and before coming to work for SolarWinds, I was actually a SolarWinds customer for a number of years. Somewhere between 8 and 10 years, I was using SolarWinds products before I came inside. My day job mostly consists around helping the product managers, helping the product marketing team, and speaking with the customers as much as possible, whether that's on our community forum, THWAC, or whether that happens to be in-person events when we will get back to those when we do our SolarWinds user groups.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. So real quick, just running through the agenda for today, what we're going to cover. We're going to do a brief overview of the Orion platform and kind of talk about some of the high-level benefits and a little bit about the new features that have been released recently. And then we're going to go through 6 case studies about ways to save money by essentially right-sizing your environment with different network monitoring tools that SolarWinds offers. So NPM, NCM, NTA, UDT, IPAM, VNQM, so all of them are going to be covered. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list of all the different use cases that we'll be covering. The first one with NPM, we're going to be looking at a survey of port density to make sure that you're using your access switches efficiently. The next one is looking at NetFlow traffic patterns to make sure that you have the right service utilization and kind of have those services sized correctly. The next one is NCM, saving time by automating time-intensive tasks that are very repetitive. Then we're going to take a look at IPAM and cataloging public subnets and kind of seeing where you could consolidate and perhaps liquidate one of your public address spaces to save some money there. Then we're going to be looking at UDT for a very similar use case as what we covered with NPM, kind of right-sizing your network segments and maybe cutting back in places where there's not as much utilization based on the new work paradigm that we're under. And then last, we're going to go into VNQM and talk about kind of the SIP trunk utilization and making sure that the trunks that you have are the right size for what you actually need. You're not paying for more than what you need. And then we're going to summarize those and kind of go through what you could have potentially saved in these environments that we're going through. Obviously, your environment is going to be very different, so all the numbers that we're using are kind of for demo purposes, and they would be different depending on what environment that you're trying to save some money in. So first up, we're going to talk a little bit about the Orion platform. And Kevin, you want to get us kicked off?
Yeah, sure. So if you are a SolarWinds customer or have been a SolarWinds customer, you probably know Orion, even though you never actually bought Orion. Orion is the platform on which most of our products are built, most of the ones, nearly all the ones for the network management platform. And what Orion is basically a single platform in which all of the other products sit on top of. And the reason this is incredibly important is that this allows us to bring you that single pane of glass. So if you have the products that we're going to be talking about today, let's say you have NPM and NTA and UDT and VNQM and IPAM, you've got those 5 products, that's great. But if you were running them in 5 separate silos, that's a nightmare if you're trying to actually report off of stuff there. The reason we have something like the Orion platform is it's a consolidated web interface, so everything looks and feels the same. It's a consolidated node management, so elements that you put in and take out are all the same. It's for graphing information side by side based on time slices, so we use that in a in our performance analysis tool, which isn't really a tool, it's a feature of the Orion platform, so it's not an additional fee. We call that perf stack, and we give you the ability to maintain your user account credentials, so you can say, okay, these people can have access to this and that, and that's all through one platform. And the great part about actually having the Orion platform is if and when you need to go ahead and do your upgrades, you upgrade at platform level. So when you upgrade your Orion platform, it looks at all of the modules, the actual products that are installed on top of that, and then builds them up from there. The other benefit is as we make improvements on the Orion platform as a package, when you do your next release, you get your next thing for NPM. You move from one version to the newer version, then any performance improvements get rolled into that and span across all of your products.
Yeah, appreciate it. So a big takeaway there, sounds like, is all the data in a single bucket, so it's accessible from all the different modules. You're not kind of siloed. You get a kind of true single pane of glass there. So next up, just calling out some of the benefits of integrating with the Orion platform. We have the cost reduction. So having all those differentiated tools using the same data set, so that there's not as much duplication of the polling effort and having to cycle back and forth between tools. You also have a complete view of your internal and external network, so you can do a good job of kind of figuring out what the root cause is. Regardless of whether you're on the network team or the systems team or the security team, you can all kind of look at that same view and figure out what the overall picture looks like to figure out what the root cause of the issue that you're experiencing is. One of the other things that's changed recently is our scalability. As of the 2020.2 release, we support 1 million elements in a single instance. So that doesn't mean a single polling engine, but your entire Orion deployment can now support up to 1 million elements total. So this gives you a pretty flexible platform that'll scale up to enterprise level. And we offer a lot of integration with third parties as well. So, for example, ServiceNow, you can integrate for generating tickets and actioning items, that kind of thing. Kevin, you want to add anything on the integrations?
No. Not really. The one thing I'm going to mention here is, because I'm a huge nerd when it comes to the Orion platform, is that the other benefit of having the Orion platform is we expose our own API through it. And that means you can have access to all of your data. You can take that data, you can put it into other systems, you can pull it out, you can do your reporting. If maybe, you don't love the way the Orion's doing one of the reports, that's fine. You can go ahead and access that information using our proprietary query language, which we call SWCL, SolarWinds Query Language. And that gives you the ability not just to read data out, but also to do updates, changes. So again, having one place to be able to maintain and control all this information is amazing. Plus, if you don't have something that's supported, like let's say you have I will give you an actual real-world example. My father, I was at his house tinkering around, and he has a new NAS that I had never worked with before, and I wanted to see what was happening on it, and it didn't work. So what happened, it wasn't being monitored clearly, and what I did is I went right onto the community forum, and I searched for this particular make and model, and someone had already written a custom poller for it. So I could just download that, install it into the platform, and all of a sudden that device was reading all this other metric information. So I was able to extend my particular install to support a device that wasn't originally installed out of the box by leveraging the community forums.
Yeah, that's definitely a really good segue into that last item there. So the SWAC community that we have is one of the strongest user communities in the industry. So that's definitely helpful when you're trying to do really custom work. I know we've got a lot of customers that use our API and SWCL integration in order to populate things like their own CMDB, items like that. So being able to integrate that way is very helpful as well. And now next up, we're going to talk about specifically the Network Performance Monitor use case that we've brought up. So for this one particularly, we've noticed that user behavior has changed a lot since COVID-19 started. A lot more people are working from home. There's a lot less people in the office. And in many cases, this is kind of a new normal. It's not being seen as a temporary thing. Well, that means that there's a lot of drops that are going into your comm closets that probably aren't going to be used in the future. Now, going through and looking at these one by one can be very time-consuming and tedious. digging through all the different cables that are in front of the patch panels to see what's plugged in, what has an active link light, what doesn't, can be very, very time consuming. And trying to record all that information down with, a pen and paper the way we used to do it would be, you're not really doing yourself any favors there. So what we wanted to do was to kind of show you how you could save on some of your CapEx costs by reallocating those underutilized switches. So the first step is figuring out how to determine which switches are underutilized, right? So as of NPM 2019.4, we have a new feature called Device View, which doesn't support all the access switches that we would like, but these 4 access switches are currently supported, and we've made the feature better with NPM 2020.2 to include switch stack support. So with that, I guess we'll jump over to the demo and kind of show how this can help you out.
So while you're getting that ready, I want to talk about a real-world example on this. So I have, for a number of years, when I was with my last company, we supported a lot of 3750 stacks, and before that, previous models, the 2900 stack series, and that's what we put in a lot of our branch offices. And we always ran into a problem where we were trying to add a new port somewhere. Like we would have the patch panel in every single office, and maybe multiple times in an office would be patched, but we didn't always have them cabled direct in because it's honestly just a waste of resources to spend and wire every single thing. But knowing what's being consumed there is incredibly important, especially if you're in a place where you are downsizing, if you're in a place where you can look at consolidation. And being able to see this in a graphical way, and not just for you. Just think about being able to give this view to your help desk when they have someone local says, well, I can't have this, and maybe there's no local IT hands. And they can say, oh, well, I need you to take the port. You need to find the model, or you need to find your port number in the closet up top, and is there a cable in there? Yeah, where's it going? Okay, I need you to move it over to, let's say, switch number 3, number 13, because it looks like it's currently empty.
Yeah, and with this feature, you can also see which ports are participating in which VLAN very easily. So kind of like what Kevin's talking about, if you had one port that wasn't working for whatever reason, you want to do a switch to another port, you could very quickly see which port would be appropriate to have the user switch to.
And this is the data VLAN. So if you're working in a VoIP infrastructure, we're not going to bring out the voice VLAN, I don't believe, as a separate indicator, because most of the stuff is going to be on the data plane, and that's the one that's most important. Obviously, if it's up and connected, you can look at the interface configuration, and we can show that in NCM if we need to, if anyone wants to see it, and see what the voice VLAN is for it.
Yeah, definitely. So I've definitely heard that feature request for getting the voice VLAN. It's not something we've incorporated yet, but something I'm definitely tracking. The other thing that we're looking at really hard here is actually overlaying some of the UDT data into the pane over here, so you can kind of get those two products working even more closely together. So when we're looking at this, we can see that this switch stack is pretty well populated just by looking at all the green check marks. So there would be a possibility, for example, if we're looking to save some money, we can see a lot of the ports right here are shut down. So perhaps, and then we've got some here that are unmonitored. So what we could do is take some of the switches, some of the ports from these other switches and maybe consolidate into this one, or perhaps move some of these links off into these other ports to free up this switch right here. By doing that, we could then allocate that switch somewhere else and save some money by not having to procure a new one, for example.
Yeah, and the thing that's nice about this for like the 3750s and the 2900 series and the Junipers as well is that these are, let's be just completely honest with everyone on the phone, these are workhorses. The 3750 has been end of life, end of sale since who knows when now, and yet they're still out there, they're still churning. I still run one, and I'm never going to have to upgrade it because it will just continue to do its job. And because of that, you may be able to, and let's say this wasn't populated quite this dense, but you were able to like maybe pull out one of those, like that last switch, switch number 7, maybe you didn't need that. You could take it out of your stack participation during a change window and then use that either as a lab switch, or probably a better use for that is when you have to set up a new small office somewhere, you can use it in the participating stack over there.
Yeah, and to Kevin's point, I've definitely gotten some feedback that the switches that we chose to support first are end of life, end of sale. But the reason those were chosen actually is because looking at our actual customer environments, those are the switches that are most predominantly used in those environments. So supporting those first makes a lot of sense from that perspective. And then here we have a Juniper switch just to kind of show off that it does work for Juniper devices as well. Obviously, Juniper devices don't have switch stack. That's a Cisco proprietary feature, but you can still see the access switch utilization for these Juniper devices as well.
Yeah, and beyond that, and not just the status, we also have in and out utilization. So if you're monitoring these specific ports, and I'm going to use the word ports, if you're monitoring specific ports for not just discards and errors, but also stuff like in and out bandwidth, you can actually see how much traffic is moving in and out. And we actually already have a question. Michael is asking whether we support the Cisco 9300s. I'm going to guess from all the discussions that not currently. I know those are, Michael, please correct me if I'm wrong, those are very frequently top-of-rack style switching. And if that's the case, it's something we definitely want to look at. We want to look at it for our roadmap. And hopefully the same technology we've already done, then we can take and use that. And the fact that that they are also stackable, it really kind of goes into the stuff. So if we can reuse the technology, adding it's probably not going to be that big of a stretch. But that's on Jason's plate because he's the product manager for the tool.
Yeah, I'm definitely tracking a long list of feature requests for this one, including improvements to the feature as well as additional device support. So hoping to deliver that at some point in the future.
Yeah, and Michael, we'll get to your scenario. Like let's say you have a stack of 2 of the 9300s. We'll show you how to do that even without this super pretty view in User Device Tracker.
That's correct. Yep. So the use case that we're kind of covering of reallocating access switches is similar for both NPM and UDT for the purpose of this webinar, but it's 2 different ways of doing the same thing, essentially. Well, that's probably enough on device view, so we'll stop sharing and go back over to our webinar here. Okay, so what we've shown you is how to do a port density survey and kind of talked about how to optimize your access switch utilization. So we looked up the average cost of a refurbished 3750. They run about $500. So let's say in our environment we had 10% of our access switches across the entire architecture that could be kind of consolidated and reused. So this would free up 10 different 48-port 3750s. So at $500 per switch, 10 switches, we'd be saving a total of about $5,000.
Not insignificant, and especially if you've already saved this, obviously the beauty of this is now it's a great time to go ahead and set up that lab you've always wanted to have.
That is one of the best things to do with extra hardware for sure. And then you can try things before you actually put it in production environment and maybe get an idea of the issues you're going to run into for sure. And Kevin, you want to kick us off on this one?
Sure. I'm going to talk real briefly about NetFlow Traffic Analyzer. So you'll hear us say stuff like NTA. Just get used to it. We are an acronym-heavy company. We love our acronyms. So when we talk about NTA, NTA is not just for NetFlow. It's for NetFlow as the large definition. So NetFlow supports SFlow, JFlow, traditional NetFlow in V5, V9, flexible NetFlow, all the things. Basically, if there's a device out there that can send flow and it goes by one of the major industry standards and isn't something specifically written by a vendor, then we're going to be able to consume it. And I used NetFlow at my last company for a number of years, and if you are been in IT for a while and you've looked at flow diagrams and diagnostics, then you know that there's plenty of information out there about flow, and you can tell good information from flow, like how busy ports are, how much traffic's moving across your WAN circuits. And it's not just necessarily for, north-south. It's not necessarily for just information going out of your infrastructure or across your WAN links or down to your devices. It can also be used for east-west if you use something like SFlow. Don't use true NetFlow if you do east-west to see like how virtual machines are talking to each other and understanding how infrastructure is talking to from one side of your rack to your other side of the rack. And being able to have that information at your hands, even if you're not going to use this stuff every single day in active troubleshooting, is absolutely critical for future planning. And what we found recently is that, again, since the work from home and the work remote has taken precedent, is we've really seen an increased reliance on SaaS-based solutions, whether it happens to be O365 or WebEx, Zoom, Teams, the rest of Microsoft 365, the Google platforms, or Salesforce, or any of these public SaaS solutions. We've seen that grow up significantly. And one of the ways that we want to make sure we're aware of that is to watch traffic going specifically to those things. And since those IPs tend to be very ephemeral, sometimes it's hard to figure out what's going where. And I can speak on SolarWinds' behalf. I'm not authorized to say all the things, but I know that our consumption of the Microsoft suite has gone up significantly since we moved to work remote. I know that there's lots of communications that are still happening in the office versus remotely, but understanding where these kind of traffic patterns happen and understanding whether or not you're working with a split tunnel versus a tunnel all scenario in your VPN could be something you can take back for consumption to your management team. Understanding how this stuff works, and let's say one of the reasons I used Flow a lot at my last company was to monitor our backups, to see how long our backups were really running, because the software will tell you one thing and the network will tell you something else. And I would watch our backup flow from our various branch offices across the network every evening and see what kind of transmit times I was getting and whether I was getting any type of unusual traffic there. And it was really, really helpful.
Yeah, I was just going to say, with everything changing, we've heard this story over and over again with different customer environments, people working from home now, work habits have changed, data consumption patterns have changed. So pretty much all the baselines that you probably got in a pre-COVID context are going to be completely different now. So looking at this stuff now is a really good time to kind of reestablish those baselines and kind of figure out where you need to fix new bottlenecks, like say VPN concentrators, that kind of thing, or maybe where you've got some excess capacity because you're not using your circuits in the same way that you used to.
Yeah, and some of that is really beneficial, especially if you adopted a VoIP solution, any type of voice over IP solution, or actually I should just say VoIP because there's also video over IP now. But any of those types of things is incredibly important to watch, especially on your internal infrastructure. Now, I know there are some SaaS solutions where you basically connect a VoIP phone to a cloud solution, but I know a lot of organizations aren't really comfortable with having that out there, and a lot of them still want to run their own call managers or their own, their Cisco call manager, their Avaya call managers, and they want that information in there. And making sure your voice and video is good, the way you actually do that on your network gear is actually having good CBQoS or class-based quality of service and making sure all the information is in there, that things are going into the right buckets, making sure that you're not having overflows, making sure you're not doing throwaways, and being able to watch that on a circuit-by-circuit basis or even at a higher level to be able to look at it at an organizational level to understand where these circuits are used. Maybe you're getting packets thrown away from your Boston office is throwing packets away and the voice is horrible and you're getting a lot of video artifacts and you look at it and you're like, we're not hitting anywhere near our bandwidth utilization. Maybe your buckets are missized and your CBQoS isn't sized correctly for that office. I actually did have this happen at an office, my last company, where we went from a 100 meg Ethernet handoff that we realized, hey, we need more bandwidth for video on net. Let's go ahead and bump it to a 200 meg Ethernet handoff. Perfect. Everything came through. Stuff's flying across. We didn't go back and alter the size of our buckets. So our CBQoS was still throttling everything as if it was running on 100 meg. Being able to see that and actually be able to hand that data over to somebody, and that was for troubleshooting. But even beyond that, to say, look, we need to resize these. And maybe nowadays it's the reverse. Maybe you're like, you know what? We don't need a 500 meg handoff for the office that has 500 seats because there's only ever going to be 30 people in that office anymore. So let's go ahead and scale back those WAN circuits, those Ethernet handoffs, and make sure that we're actually right-sizing our leased lines and our WAN information for the proper sized office.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and take a look at what this data actually looks like inside of the product. So, yeah, Kevin, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so this one we've already pre-filtered for Microsoft Office 365. You can see it there at the top where it says NBAR2 applications, shown only MS-Office 365. Now, this is using the NBAR2 technology, which is we know is a Cisco proprietary technology. And you basically put these little packs on the routers, and the routers, when they ship off the NetFlow, automatically tag it with this type of information and actually looks inside the packets to understand how that works. Now, this is obviously a very simple scenario. But let's say you're not running Cisco gear, or you're running older Cisco gear that can't support the new NBAR2 protocol, which honestly is a brilliant solution. It's a great way to do it. You're not putting the extra load on the machines. You're not putting the extra workload on you to diagnose all that stuff. You not have to update your packs every time they get updated. So one of the things that we've made sure we have the ability to do here is watch any type of traffic that you can classify yourself. So this is for Office 365, and we have another one, Jason, I believe it's the next demo tab. We have this one where it's for Microsoft Teams and Skype. Now, this is actually running in my lab that I have here at SolarWinds, so please ignore these spikes and numbers because that's completely boring because I don't have like 40 or 60 people in that lab running. But what's nice about the ability to do this is even if you don't have devices that support the NBAR protocols, you can still, the NBAR management packs, what you can still do is define your own. And the great thing about something like Zoom or Microsoft 365 or Cisco's WebEx or any of these major SaaS providers is they have to give you documentation about like what IPs they run on, whether it's an IP range or individual IPs, and what ports they use, and TCP and UDP ports. And the reason they give that to you is because we have a lot of people that are very paranoid about their firewall configurations. Totally get it, 100%. Right there, got it. But what we get to do as just people interested in NetFlow, we get to take that information and build them into IP groups and build them into application groups. And then this one here, this Microsoft Teams / Skype, is literally built off a list that we have that Microsoft provided, a list of the protocols that are being used, the protocol ports, and then the public list of IP addresses. And we can just say, hey, I want to define an application as these ports going to this set of IP addresses. And that's all it takes. It's a couple minutes. In fact, we made it easier in the recent version of NetFlow where you can actually just import these IP groups if other people have already built them. We have 3 articles on Thwack right now, if you're running NTA, for how to monitor Zoom, how to monitor Cisco WebEx, and how to monitor Microsoft Teams / Skype because they use similar infrastructure. And you can just and I already include on that page a download link for the IP addresses already there. So you can just import that IP address, do this quick definition, step-by-step instructions, then you can watch it. And like we said, this is great for these particular applications, especially if you work in an environment that is highly secured and you make most of your people come in over a VPN tunnel. So you can actually look at traffic from your VPN concentrator through your infrastructure and then out over to one of these external resources. And I like it for troubleshooting. And then if you need to dig deeper, if you could just expand the Flow Navigator on the left for me. Sure. This is probably the most powerful thing here, and we've got some Thwack Tuesday tip videos about it and how to use it and all these kinds of things. But this lets you really dig in to what you're looking for. Maybe you really love this particular Skype and Microsoft Teams view, and you want to make sure this is easily accessible. You can put in your filters, say I only want it from this certain circuit, or I only want it across these network links, or I only want it from and to these directions. And then you can also at the very bottom say, you know what, this is so important I don't want to build this again. So you can save it as a brand new type, or a brand new, basically, entry on your menu bar. So you can get to it quick and easy. I did this actually for our call managers at my last company, because I wanted to know, and that was all UDP traffic, so I wasn't able to get a ton of kind of content inside of it, but I could see how quickly it was flowing across the infrastructure, and I could say I want traffic to and from, or to or from, I should say, these particular set of call managers, which were thankfully all in the same IP range, and then I just saved that, built the link, and then I gave that link out to the voice team, which we were in those days, we were a traditional POTS company, so we had the regular the call routing, and then we moved over to voice over IP so they could watch as adoption went up, including watching if there was any drops on these circuits using CBQoS.
And so the big takeaway is from a cost savings perspective is using this data to kind of right-size your circuits. So especially if you're using old school traditional lines, lease lines are extremely expensive, or maybe looking at your VPN concentrator and perhaps adding some capacity based on all the work from home traffic that you're seeing now. Mm-hmm. Let's jump back over to the slides for just a moment. Using NTA, you can essentially look at the consumption trends and determine your overall service utilization. So let's say in our sample environment that we're analyzing, we have a 500 megabyte Ethernet handoff that's costing us $1,500 a month. And then we look at our NetFlow analysis, and we find out that even at the highest peak time, we're only using 250 megabytes. And so that's sufficient. If we were to cut that circuit down, $1,500 a month divided times 12 months divided by 2, $9,000. That would be saved from this particular exercise.
Mm-hmm. And that, of course, is one of those fees. Unlike pulling a switch out of the stack, this is one of those things that keeps returning month over month over month.
Yeah, definitely. So next up, we're going to go through Network Configuration Manager. So this is the SolarWinds automation product. It's used for backing up configurations, for making bulk changes to configurations, that type of thing. And that's probably the biggest use case that we could use to save money is making those repetitive, time-consuming changes. If you've got thousands of devices and they all need a new SNMP community string, or they all need certain VTY security settings, that type of thing, you can actually push that out in an automated fashion using NCM.
NCM is my favorite. NCM was the second product I ever bought. The first one was, this is how long ago I bought it. The first product I bought was Orion, because that's how many years ago it was, before it was called NPM. And then the second one I got was NCM because I worked on the network engineering team. And the big portion for me was I needed to make sure I had my configs backed up. More than anything, that's the reason I bought it, and then I found so many other uses for it.
I've heard that story several times. Lots of people come in looking to just back up configs and not realizing all the other greatness that NCM will actually do for them. Mm-hmm. So in this particular one, we're looking at standardizing configurations. That's definitely a security requirement. We're seeing a large rise in security incidents as more people are working from home, and kind of the bring your own device paradigm is intrinsically less secure than having people in a corporate network. So we're finding customers need to go out and kind of re-secure their environments, especially if they're deploying, like, for example, SD-WAN edge to the customer environment, or they're deploying an ASA or something like that to give them VPN connectivity back in. Being able to do bulk configurations for those types of items in a very short amount of time is really important. Doing that kind of stuff is very prone to human error. You fat finger one key in a community string, it's not going to work. So automating those processes definitely makes it a lot less error prone. And then the larger your environment, the more devices you have, the more potential attack vectors there are for someone to get in. Enterprise is only as strong security-wise as the weakest device that's in there. So having a consistent deployment and having all the configurations be to a standard is extremely helpful in kind of hardening the environment overall. So our solution using NCM, we're going to utilize network automation to make bulk changes, and we're going to walk you through what that looks like. And we can also track when and where those changes occur and who made them. So you can have some accountability. If someone did something boneheaded and broke something, you can track it back and see what they did.
It never happens. Network engineers are perfect. It never happens.
I have a great shirt that's along those lines that says, I'm an engineer. To save time, let's just assume I never do anything wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then last, we want to make sure that we're facilitating compliance auditing, and network automation can really help out with that. So again, just making sure that there's a common configuration on all your devices and they're all as secure as possible.
And I want to point out here that we use the words compliance and audit a lot when we talk about NCM. We're not talking about the HIPAA or the Sarbanes-Oxley, we are talking about those as well, but we're not talking about exclusively those. The company I came from was completely privately held. We were not bound by most of those kind of standards, so we didn't have to worry about PCI DSS setups. We never handled credit card transactions. None of that stuff was there. But I still wanted every single one of my switches configured with the same VLANs. I wanted my core switches. I wanted them all to have the same VLAN definitions. I wanted to make sure they all had a banner message on it, the traditional warning, this is a secure system, et cetera, et cetera. I wanted to make sure all that stuff was there. So what I ended up using, like I said, I bought it for backups and then extended it. I ended up, customizing my own rules and saying, this rule doesn't apply to my environment. This one does. So I want to see how this works compliance-wise. And that way I could go back and tell that my supervisor every single time would not do things the same way office to office. It's like he forgot what happened since the last new office we stood up.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got, I want to say, 3 different screens here that we're going to go through for NCM. 3 screens total. So with this first one, we're looking at the config summary. So you can see the last 5 config changes. You can see which devices have firmware vulnerabilities. You can see overall policy report violations. This is kind of your general dashboard to see the overall status for your configurations.
And the most important ones here for maintaining compliance, especially if you have junior engineers, is the pending approval list. So you can build up script templates to say, and maybe it's something as simple as swapping a VLAN on a port. You can say, hey, junior admin, I want you to switch these VLANs, and they could go through this interface and say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do this, and I want to change this to this, and submit that. And then that goes to an approval process that you then can review as their manager and say, yes, this is fine. This is, again, one of the ways to kind of get around the fat finger scenario. You can say, oh, yeah, this is fine. Let's go ahead and push it through at this time during the change window. In addition to that, we actually have the firmware stuff. Sorry, I literally just recorded a video about this. The firmware, if you have more than 3 devices, this will save you so much time. So much time. But, Jason, you can go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what it is.
Yeah, I can definitely recall back being a network engineer, if we've got 100 devices to go through and do firmware upgrades on, doing that manually is not only time-consuming and error-prone, but it's kind of a waste. It's very tedious, so it just screams, "Hey, script me."
And a lot of us have done it, and I know, Jason, I know you were one of those. I think we actually had a discussion about this. We had kind of like that notepad that we had with all the information that we were just like, copy and then like paste into the PuTTY window and just hope that everything came through clean and that we had enough space and that we were, our configuration registers were set correctly and all those things. And then when it didn't happen, then you got a lot of work on your hands.
And then you're off shift and you've got to transition all of that over to the oncoming technician and, copying and pasting those notes and having him understand your note system rather than having a common platform that sort of tracks that all for you. It makes the process a lot more difficult.
Yeah. And the firmware upgrade is really powerful in that we actually we do a lot of checks, and we have a lot of templates available out of the box. The Cisco one obviously is very popular, but we've got Cisco, Juniper, EtherWAN, and we also give you the ability to build your own templates. And when I say build your own templates, you build it in the web page. You don't like edit an XML file and then save it somewhere. You build it in the web page and basically get to make your own wizard to do your own firmware upgrades.
And then on this one, we've got config change templates. So this would be kind of more speaking to those use cases that we were talking about earlier, standardizing configurations. So you can see, for example, we've got change templates for changing a Cisco iOS password, or the enable password here, or changing VLAN memberships for Lenovo. So we've got a lot of different config templates that are already here to make those bulk changes. And then, as Kevin was saying, you can come up with your own as well.
Yeah, one of the last ones I wrote before I left my last company is actually, I think it's in the demo. It's configuring flexible NetFlow. Because I always wanted to have, basically NetFlow is one of those things where it's always going to be, it's 95% of the time it's the same thing. You can do the same thing for syslogs, but the great part about it is that if it's a repetitive process and all of your devices basically meet the same kind of standards, then why are you doing this stuff by hand anymore? I mean, maybe for the first one, yeah, of course. But then after that, why? It just takes way, way too much time.
When you have 1,000 especially, yeah.
Yeah. And I will tell you the scenario that I used that NCM gave me, there's 2 scenarios where it gave value. One was where a switch completely fried and I just needed all of the ports reconfigured and I had a backup from the day before. That's the kind of traditional use case. But the other one that I ran into was when we actually changed out our TACAX servers. If you're not familiar with TACAX, it's an authentication scheme that's used with Cisco gear and basically just kind of proxies in front of other authentication information. but we were retiring a bunch of old ones in our 3 data centers, and we were bringing up new ones, and we had to bring them up in parallel. And because we brought them up in parallel, they had different DNS names, they had different IP addresses. And what that really meant was on every piece of network gear I had to negate the existing TACAX server list and put in the new one in the proper order based on its geo, and that was horrible. And I did it for 6 devices, and I said, never again. And so I built a template and said, let's go ahead and send this template out to 2 or 3 offices just to see what's going to happen, or 2 or 3 devices just to see what's going to happen. And when that worked, then I sent it to like one of each kind of major type, each core switch, each floor switch, each router. And I sent it to one of those, and it all went clean. And I said, next change window, I'm changing them all. It changed, I think it was, it's been a couple of years, but it was over 1,000 and less than 1,500. So let's say around 1,200. It changed 1,200 devices in 40 minutes.
Yeah, so this kind of leads into our cost-saving example really nicely. So you can see how automating some command scripts and the tasks associated with those could definitely save a lot of time. So let's say that an average security engineer earns about $6,700 a month. That's U.S. dollar United States prices. So assume NCM gives your overall team 10% more productivity by scripting those repetitive tasks. And so because of that, now only you need to have 9 employees instead of 10, or maybe you can reallocate that employee to other tasks. Either way, there's savings associated with that. So if we save an entire employee's salary, that's $6,700 per month for 12 months. That's $80,000, so quite a bit. And then being able to actually use your security engineer for those other critical projects, I'm sure they have other things that they could be doing, is definitely priceless. Thinking about the security vulnerabilities that they would be, or security events that they could potentially prevent by putting their focus to more critical tasks. And next up, we've got IP Address Manager. You want to introduce that one, Kel?
Sure. So IPAM is exactly what it says it is. It's IP Address Manager. It's a environment. It's a system that basically watches your DHCP, your DNS servers, and can look at subnets. And I know that doesn't sound exciting. It's probably the least exciting thing any network engineer does, which is handling IP addressing. That being said, it is also one of the most critical things you will ever do. So one of the things that I like about it is I know whether or not IPs are being used, and that's our scenario today.
Perfect. So the challenge with this one, so we have public addresses that are still very expensive. IPv4 is still widely used, despite everyone saying that IPv6 was going to be taking over. At least in the United States, that has still not happened. I remember back in like 2010, it was being talked about as though it was imminent. So IPv4 addresses have continued a steady climb since 2012. Right now, the average price, if you're buying in, it really depends on how many addresses you're buying at a time, but the price per address tends to be between $22 and $30 right now. Back in the day, it used to be like $6 per address. It's definitely gone up. And we found that in many customer environments, their public address spaces are pretty underutilized, which means they have an asset that they're paying for that's just sitting there not really generating any value. So our solution to this is to use IPAM to kind of automate your IP address tracking, see which addresses are being used and which ones are not. And then this product isn't a full DDI, so it's not going to do an actual DHCP or DNS service for you, but it will integrate with your Windows DHCP or info blocks, that kind of thing, and surface that data and give you, kind of a more single pane of glass to see all that. And we'll switch over to the demo and kind of show that real quick. Want to kick us off here, Kevin?
Yeah, sure. So this is, again, almost all of our products ship with a summary screen, which we feel is kind of just bulling up the most important information to the top. Here, the two resources I really want to talk about, first and foremost, are the two on the left, top 10 subnets by address used and top 10 DHCP scopes by used. Now, these are different, although they may report on the same thing. In fact, you can see like the first yellow one and the top block is for external access on East 0300. And then it's actually the top one in the DHCP scope. These are actually the same thing, because when you really think about DHCP scopes, normally they are assigned basically to a specific subnet. But what's nice about this is you probably don't have DHCP running in your DMZ. In fact, I don't know anybody. I'm sure there's a couple people, but that doesn't mean you can't go ahead and scan through those and find addresses like the first 4 or 5 here. We've got the 10.11, the 10.199, the 10.199. Those are still subnets that you can scan and check on. And being able to actually watch these and understand, what IP addresses are being used, whether they are, what type of devices they're fixed to, because we're actually talking to these devices. We get some host information occasionally, depending on which modules you use, we'll get the MAC address. And we'll also tell you if you're running this with NPM, if we actually match that up with an existing node. And if you're running with UDT, we'll tell you the MAC address and the person who's logged on to those devices. And obviously much more information. An IP address manager will give you your IP conflicts, whether or not, if one's a reservation versus, one's statically assigned and then we got a DHCP handing one over top of it, or if your DNS records mismatch. I really like the DNS side. It makes me able to search stuff, and I don't have to keep popping those Microsoft MMCs to get through and find everything.
Yeah, and you could very easily see, you wouldn't be able to save any money by consolidating your private address space, but with these, some of the public address space, if you had like 2 of them that were at, 21% utilization, for example, if you were to move all the devices that are in this subnet over to this subnet, you could then liquidate this address space, for example, and that's the money savings aspect of what we're looking at here.
Yeah, because that's just a monthly or an annual fee. You're throwing away. You're not using it for everything, and that's where you can put stuff behind NATs, and that's a whole larger discussion. We can have obviously, if you want to have that, let us know. But there's a whole lot of ways we can save you money just by reducing basically your footprint.
Yeah, exactly. So by looking at your public subnets and kind of cataloging and figuring out what's being used, what's not, and then consolidating them. Let's say in our demo environment, we assumed that you could, or we found that we could consolidate from 4 Class C networks to 3. So as a result, we're able to liquidate 254 addresses. 254 addresses times $30, that's $3,048 saved just by liquidating that Class C out of your environment.
Boom, done. One less bill to pay each month.
Next up, we're going to cover User Device Tracker. So this is a product that's kind of our user activity monitoring software. It has a little bit of network access control functionality in it, in that you can turn on and off ports. You can track rogue devices. So it's a pretty interesting product that provides a lot of visibility into what your end user is doing and what devices that they're using. For this particular use case, we're going to say that NPM's device view isn't supported in your environment. So kind of like what the user brought up earlier with our top of rack switch. But you still need to take a look at your underutilized access switches and try to redeploy those to save some money. UDT would be a product that could offer the solution for that. So UDT has robust switch port monitoring, and it will map users and devices back to your network topology. And then you could use this information to find underutilized segments of your network and reallocate those resources. So we'll jump over to demo for this one.
Yeah, we see a lot of our customers get IPAM and UDT at the same time, just because they complement each other incredibly well. You have a lot of information that you're able to pull across, and a lot of that is because you kind of need both sides of it. You can do a lot of the information with one or the other, but having the 2 of them really kind of exposes a lot of better information.
So this is the device inventory page for UDT. Let's say, for example, I wanted to see all the resources that a user named Hughes is using.
Jason, you got real quiet.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me okay?
You're real quiet.
Is that better?
That is it.
Okay, cool. Mike was just a little too far away from my face there.
That'll happen.
So let's say we wanted to look up all the different devices that are being used by a user that had a last name Hughes. You could very quickly just throw that into the search bar, and UDT will pull that list up for you.
And what's nice about this is this will give you who it is, what the machine name is, the IP address, the MAC address, what the vendor is based off of said MAC address, and also tell you which switch they're on and what port they're on. So if this happens to be someone who's reporting, or you have not someone who's reporting, but you have a security system in place that's looking for, bad traffic, like something that's watching your firewall logs, you can easily put in this information, know which port that person's on, and turn that port off right through here.
Mm-hmm. And then we have a user inventory view as well. It has similar search functionality.
Again, this is just one of those kind of two sides of the same coin information. Understand that this has that, and that you can look by the user or look by the switch port, and we get the information from two different sides. On the switch port side, for the physical port, we will obviously talk to the network here, and then for the user logins, we will actually talk through Active Directory and crawl through some event logs there to find out who's logged into what. And then on the backside, we're doing all of that really complex lookup, MAC to IP through ARP table back to this, down all the way down to port. So it's one less thing you have to worry about. But go ahead.
I was going to say we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to jump to our last one here, which is VNQM once I run through this. So let's say using UDT, we were able to cut down two switches that were $2,500 a piece, so 9,200 access switches. So that's a total of 5,000 that we could potentially save using UDT's functionality here. Our last product that we're going to cover relatively quickly is VNQM. So it's VoIP and Network Quality Manager. This is particularly useful if you're using Cisco call managers, which have SIP trunks associated with them. So the Cisco Session Information Protocol, SIP, is what facilitates those voice and multimedia calls. Because of, again, COVID, we're seeing a lot of people shifting to residential ISPs and using SaaS voice services, so Zoom and WebEx and that type of thing, instead of their Cisco call centers. So given that those SIP trunks that you're using are pretty expensive, so taking another look at how many simultaneous calls that you need to support could really help you to resize that SIP trunk and save some money by doing so. So we'll jump over to the demo and take a look at what that looks like. So with these two screens here, I think I'm on the wrong screen. We'll use this one. With this one, you can see how many calls that you have over a set period of time. I'm not going to drill into it as much because we're a little short on time, but you could pull this into PerfStack and drill into this even more to see over time when your peaks and valleys are as far as call utilization. Sometimes SIP trunks are charged as you use them. Other times it's a set amount of bandwidth for a given period of time. So depending on what your utilization is, you could resize your SIP trunk to find some cost savings that way as well. And before I jump to the last closing stuff, Kevin, do you have anything you want to add on this one?
Nope. I just want to make sure that everyone realizes when we keep saying open in PerfStack, you literally just click that link in the top that says open in PerfStack.
Super simple.
And then all of a sudden it just builds it out for you.
And then you can change the timing for this chart to get more or less data as your use case deems fit, essentially. Cool. So let's say we evaluated our SIP trunk, and we found that we needed 200 calls per second, which is 2865. And we were using 200 calls per second, and we found out that we only need 50 calls per second. That's only going to cost us $615 per month instead of $2865. So if we subtract what we're paying now, or what we're paying then, and what we're paying now, multiply that times 12, we get 27,000 saves total. And obviously that would roll over year after year. So in total, this is the amount that we would save by going through all of these different exercises. Obviously, these numbers are pretty fluffy. They're based on fictitious environments. So when you're looking at your environment, the numbers would not be fictitious. They would be much more real. This also is not a all-encompassing list of ways to solve to save money using Orion products. This is just 6 examples of ways that we thought of. And next up, we've got some poll question for you. I think we've got 3 minutes left. So we're running a couple minutes over, but if you all wouldn't mind filling out that poll, we'd really appreciate it.
Yep, we try to make it easy. It's just 3 questions. It's all we're looking at, hoping you got out of this something that you're able to take back to your management to have these discussions. And one of the things that I love most about the Orion platform, and I know we're gonna try to wrap this up right at the top of the hour, is that being on a common reporting framework and being on a common web framework allows you to do a lot of customizations. And when I say customizations, I don't mean a lot of visual stuff. I mean extending out your monitoring in ways that are actually important for your business. So let's say you were actually able to determine that the cost of each port on a switch is $6 a month. That's the cost of the switch, annual maintenance, blah, blah, blah. You could actually put that into a custom property and add that custom property to a report that would tell you this switch is costing the business this number of dollars per month to run. And then as the port consumption goes up and down, that report obviously would change. You can have those reports out there for a single time. You can have those reports out there scheduled out. So you can send a weekly report of something like this. And obviously, we've talked about the network stack here, but we have products also that plug into the Orion platform for the application side as well. So there's always a way to kind of make this monitoring solution your own and able to take the information that we're able to get with just a traditional NMS and actually turn it to actually make good business decisions.
Yeah, and that's something that our sales engineers can actually help out with too. If anybody wants to jump on a call and kind of determine more what's applicable to their specific environment, kind of tailored to their needs, we would be happy to help set that up. So we're running a little short on time here, but you can definitely reach out to Kevin or I on Slack is probably the best way.
Yep, and I think we answered most of the questions that have come through. If there are any other ones, I'm going to stay on for a couple of minutes just to try to answer any Q&As that come in. But if there's any questions, we'll answer them via typing.
Yeah, I'll be around as well for a few minutes after. But I do want to thank everybody for being here. I know your time is precious, and we really appreciate your attention. If there's any other use cases that you're really interested in as far as saving money with Orion, or if you just want to jump on a call and chat, definitely reach out. It's been a pleasure.